And welcome back to Capitol Tonight. Well, this week, one of New York's most powerful politicians was forced to face the music, and an outgoing state senator prepared to plead guilty to federal corruption charges. And on top of all of that, the legislature made a return trip to Albany and left without achieving their primary objective, as outlined by Governor Patterson. So here to tackle those stories and more are the intrepid reporters of the Roundtable. They were kind enough to cap off their week with us. Joining us in studio tonight is Casey Seiler. He's the state editor of the Albany Times-Union. And Nick Reisman is a political reporter for the Gannett News Service. And with us tonight from New York City, Errol Lewis. He is the new host of our sister station's political program, Inside City Hall. Gentlemen, thank you so much for your time. It's good to see you all.
Good to be here.
And Errol, welcome.
Good to see you. Thank you.
And I want to start with you, actually. Because you did some really yeoman's work on Wrangell. You did some live coverage, a lot of it. And I just wondered if you felt the same way that I did, that the ultimate censure was a little bit of a letdown in terms of all this buildup, and then it took a minute and it was over.
Sure, it was absolutely anticlimactic. I mean, the way we'd all been writing about it for weeks and indeed months was as if, being censured was, was something horrible was going to happen to him, and it was all over in less than a minute, and it was a fairly tepid recitation, not chapter and verse of all of his problems, but the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, saying, "You are hereby censured," essentially. And, I think the dramatic, emotional scene when the Ethics Committee voted to censure him, when he nearly broke down and cried, I mean, that was, I guess, where the pain was felt. But no, in the end, he actually mounted a fairly spirited defense and seemed to have a sense of humor about the whole thing afterwards.
Yeah, it was like vintage Charlie Wrangell afterwards,
well,
I thought.
He left the well to applause and then immediately went into a press conference, which was classic Charlie Wrangell being waspish with the press. So it's kind of hard to imagine. He's taken a measure of his comeuppance, and he said he did the classic, well, I acknowledge my mistakes, but they were really all other people's mistakes.
Right.
My accountants, my attorneys.
And let the record show that I did nothing wrong.
Right.
I just was censured, but I've really done nothing wrong.
Yeah.
What did you think?
Yeah, one thing that was pretty interesting was you had a number of outgoing Democrats who lost their seats in November vote in favor of the censure. Scott Murphy from Glens Falls, Dan Maffei from Central New York District, Mike McMahon from Staten Island. But one person who voted against the censure was Pete King of Long Island.
Yeah, that was
interesting. A lot of people
interesting.
were not expecting that. I think he was only one of two Republicans to vote.
Yeah, you know who else? Ron Paul.
Yeah.
How weird is that? Errol, do you know anything about the relationship between Pete King and Charlie Wrangell? Why Pete King felt compelled to do that? He asked all of his colleagues, hey, join with me and vote for reprimand.
And exactly two of them joined him.
Indeed.
No, I don't know. I have to assume, frankly, that he was simply speaking his mind. And, Pete King, as a sort of a maverick member of the delegation, he's often very outspoken. He certainly was about the Islamic Center downtown, on security issues. He's often very outspoken. But it's actually interesting because the rap down here, at least, is that on one level, he's not that interested in becoming a Republican powerhouse. And you forget that sometimes. The media gives him a lot of ink, but we saw it in black and white there that he is not a leader within his conference.
Right.
I mean, he didn't persuade anybody to come along with him.
And yet, though, he did an interview earlier this week, I think, or maybe last, with the New York Observer, in which he said, I'm not ruling out any statewide runs in the future. I mean, that's like a sort of thing that he does every time he gets mentioned, because there's so few Republicans in New York.
He's got the profile of a statewide candidate who could do quite well. Sort of an Irish guy from the suburbs of New York City could probably do well. A Catholic could on paper do very well statewide. He's not interested in doing it, though.
Well, now I'd like to also talk about the session, such as it was. You guys were there at the Capitol into the wee hours of the morning, and not a whole heck of a lot got done.
That's right. Well, the Assembly was able to pass a moratorium on hydraulic fracturing or hydrofracking that would extend the moratorium until May 15th.
Will the governor sign it?
The governor has until December 13th to sign it. He said it's not going to be that big of a deal either way if there's a moratorium in place. So it's still kind of up in the air. You got a lot of business groups who say it's going to be the end of the world if there's a moratorium in place. A lot of environmentalists who are really pushing for this at the same time. So the governor's given no indication if he's going to actually put his signature on it.
What environmentalists say is it's not the biggest deal in terms of public policy going forward, but it was a very big deal symbolically in terms of getting people involved and thinking about the issue. But basically the bottom line for this session was they came back and accepted the free money and the, in the space
free
of
money.
The
they
free
were
money
giving it out at the door in the Capitol.
600 mil, and passed a panel to see about handing out more money in terms of pay raises for
judges.
Judiciary. Yes, exactly. But in terms of cutting, got absolutely nothing done.
Right,
so,
and that which led Governor-elect Andrew Cuomo to say they had failed the people of New York State once again.
Right.
Errol, let me ask you, in terms of hydrofracking, and this is actually not just an upstate issue. Downstate, we saw today New York City public advocate Bill de Blasio send out a letter urging the governor to actually sign this moratorium. How is it playing down there, if at all?
Oh, hydrofracking. And look, the only thing people know about hydrofracking down here for the most part is what they've seen in that movie Gasland,
right?
Which is a piece of propaganda, actually. It's absolutely terrifying. I don't know how accurate it is, but it's really scary. They know that, and they know that this could all go on somewhere near the watershed that supplies New York City with fresh drinking water.
Right.
And so those two facts alone, without any further inquiry, has persuaded most of the political class down here that there should be no hydrofracking, period. Now, some of them will dress it up and say, well, we need studies, we need, some sort of peer-reviewed exploration of this. The politicians are cutting right to the chase. No hydrofracking, no way, no time.
Yeah. Well, what's interesting also to me is that the further that you get closer to where the Marcellus Shale actually is, and there are some publications that you guys have out there,
that's right,
then the more difficult it becomes, because there are people who could actually make money off land leases.
That's right. And there are a number of properties in Pennsylvania that have become very lucrative for people to own when they give up their gas rights to what's believed to be the natural gas underneath there.
Right.
So, yeah, there's a lot of money at stake here for some people, a lot of jobs that a lot of people in the southern tier section of upstate New York are really hoping that will come to that area. So it's not a complete black and white issue for a lot of people that live out in that area.
Well, and also we're going to see the Senate again. As it turns out, we will be seeing them next Tuesday.
Coming back on Tuesday to take up the possible rescue plan for New York City off-track betting, which, of course, we just learned today will not shut down as they were supposed to do right about now.
Yeah, this is a little bit of a crying wolf situation, is it not?
That's exactly what Dean Skello said. Dean Skello said on Monday that, haven't we all heard this before, and NYC-OTB is about to go under, and it never goes under. And in fact, today it's not going to go under, but now they're saying Tuesday, this is it.
This time, we mean it this time.
And it was very interesting. Yesterday, the governor's office puts out this statement saying that there's not the 32 votes available in the Senate to pass the OTB restructuring plan. And then Dean Skelos' office puts out a statement saying, well, we're not really in favor of what the governor has to offer, but we are, hoping that we're going to get this plan passed.
Intriguingly, Roy McDonald from the Capital Region, whose district includes the Saratoga racetrack, said, look, it might not be the best plan, but I am willing to vote for it.
So he broke the Republican wall.
Right, exactly. And that could be a harbinger of other schisms that could occur when we have a 32-member GOP majority as opposed to the 32-member.
Though, I just want to ask, Errol, I thought Mayor Bloomberg's been kind of quiet about this one, don't you think?
Yes, he has. In fact, what this has all been about, not just blame shifting, but burden shifting. Yep. His main achievement in all of this was to get the OTB to be a state responsibility if the whole thing goes belly up.
That's right.
And he was absolutely right to do that. This is a bloody mess. It has been very hard to get a hold of it. In some ways, they really are shifting deck chairs on the Titanic. This thing has got to be completely reworked, completely rethought. That's not going to happen by Tuesday. So it's really just the size of the Band-Aid that they're going to create by Tuesday is the only real issue. But this still cries out for a thorough rethinking.
Yeah, and actually the governor put out a statement just not so long ago. It came from the Patterson administration. This morning he said when he was co-hosting WOR, which he's been doing a lot of radio lately as he's headed out the door, he said that it's definitely going to close and maybe we'll reopen it next Tuesday. Then he amends that to say, well, actually it turns out it's more expensive to close it than it is to keep it going, even though we don't have any money, so we are going to keep it going. I don't know. I'm not even going to bet what's going to happen. But
you make. I mean, for those who have never been inside one of these parlors, they make all their money on the weekend.
Yeah.
So if you were going to close it, this would not be the right time to do it.
I do want to ask you, actually, Nick, about something that's going to happen on Monday, we think, which has to do with former Senator, now Vincent Liebel. Do you want to just give us the brief snapshot of what's happening here? Because it's a little confusing, actually.
Well, it's a little confusing, and I don't know if I can be too brief, but essentially, Vincent Liebel resigned his Senate seat effective 11/59 Thursday. And he is not going to be taking office as the Putnam County executive. He had vacated a seat. Now he's not going to take that spot in January. He is expected to plead guilty to some felony corruption charges.
Federal.
Not federal felony corruption charges. We are not sure what those charges are. We're not sure when that's going to happen. He was expected in court on Thursday. He didn't appear. He was spotted at the White Plains courthouse this morning for about a half hour, and he hasn't been seen since. So we really don't know what's going to happen. He is expected in court again on Monday.
The ironic thing, though, is that the Republicans spent all of the campaign saying the Democrats are corrupt, AEG, the Democrats are corrupt, and now, as it turns out, oh yes.
Yes.
It's a bipartisan thing.
Right, exactly. And the hilarious thing is that not on the record, but you will have certain members of the Republican conference saying, well, you know, Liebel, he was kind of an odd guy. He was kind of quiet, kind of kept to himself. You know, it's almost like the guy who goes crazy next door, and you're like, hey, he's quiet, kept to himself. But yeah, they're essentially trying to say, well, he's no longer a senator now, which, as Nick pointed out, as of midnight last night, he's not. So he's not their problem anymore.
But don't you think, Errol, don't you think writ large, really, I mean, people are going to sort of just shuffle this off as, oh, yes, Albany, oh, yes.
Oh, of course. I mean, and there's no other way around it. And in fact, there may be even more. I mean, I'm assuming. I mean, Nick can say differently, but I'm assuming that this is all part of the product of Anthony Mangone pleading guilty to charges and becoming presumably a federal informant, and that reaches back here to the city, to the New York City Board of Elections, and the contract for new voting machines. This is unfortunately very much business as usual, where contracts, land deals, and the legislature have this kind of unhealthy relationship, shall we say.
Yeah, actually, when you mentioned the voting machines, there were some 200,000 votes found miraculously in New York City, which changed the whole sort of landscape it didn't change the outcomes, but do you think it might actually have an impact on the Senate recount, Errol, at all?
It was only 31% of the votes.
Right.
Actually, it doesn't. Actually, it doesn't, because the contested seats are in the suburbs. So none of the New York City seats, as far as we know so far, nobody's suggesting that any of them would have gone any different.
Do you think, though, that it might become an argument, Casey, when we go to tomorrow? We're supposed to hear from the judge, actually, in the 7th Senatorial District on Long Island. That's the Craig Johnson-Jack Martin's race.
Yes, you will absolutely hear that. You'll hear that argument being made by lawyers. And you will, of course, hear the counter-argument from Republicans, which have been doing, as I described it on our blog, a kind of surrender Dorothy to the Senate Democrats, saying it's time for Craig Johnson to give up the ghost and just kind of succumb to reality. But
actually, Casey Seiler, he does a little stand-up comedy on the side, stand-up political comedy. Unfortunately, we're out of time. I want to thank you all very much. Thank you, Casey Seiler. Thank you, Nick Reisman. And also thank you, Errol Lewis, very much for joining us. Okay, still to come, there will be an update from the snow-covered western portion of our state, and why New York State Thruway officials are saying that they will do things differently next time. We'll be right back.